Then next is points of parliamentary inquiry. Points of parliamentary inquiry is a request by a delegate to the chairs for an explanation or clarification regarding the rules of procedure. Let's say the chairs mentioned, okay, everyone, we're going to submit a amendment. For anyone who wanted to submit an amendment, please submit it to this email. And then since you're not sure, let's say you're a beginner and not sure what exactly is amendment, you can raise points of parliamentary inquiry. Chair, could you explain what exactly is amendment? So you can do that. Or you're not sure what to do, let's say in informal debate, then you can just raise point of parliamentary inquiry and ask what are the options that you can do in informal debate, and maybe they can answer it with moderated caucus, explain moderated caucus, explaining unmoderated caucus, and explaining consultations of the whole. So essentially, it's asking to the chairs to give a clarification and explanation regarding the rules of procedure. And then last is right of reply. For right of reply, whenever delegate feels like their personal or national integrity has been called into questions by another delegate's comment, they can raise a right of reply. But it needs to be guaranteed by the chairs first. So usually the process is you send a private message to your chair that you want to issue a right of reply for delegate of this because of this. So you have to state your reason. And then if the chairs recognize the violation conducted by another delegate, they will give you a individual speaking time outside of moderated caucus and outside of GSLs as well. So yeah, so you have an individual speaking time just to address the matter that was previously mentioned. So when exactly can you raise a right of reply? I've seen too many misconceptions of rights of reply. People think when another delegate disagrees with their point, then you can raise a right of reply, but you cannot, because disagreeing in a academic competitions, especially in the conference like MN, is not a personal attack. It's just an academic discussion. Instead, if they attack you personally, for example, in the instances of sexism or racism, in that situation, yes, you have to raise rights of reply. And I'm definitely going to advise the chairs as well to give proper punishment for any delegate that conducts such behavior. Maybe you can send them warning or what. It depends on the secretariat and the chair's discretions as well. But yeah, it could be a personal attack like that, or let's say they make fun of your president. So even though it's not a personal attack to you, but if there's a personal attack towards your president, that could also be counted as rights of reply, because as you can see, there's a national integrity has been called into question. So you can raise rights of reply, but always remember that you have to send private message to your chair first, unless they have other means that they prefer. Okay, next is motions. Motions are used to discuss substantive matters, and they help to further the discussions on your committee topic. Most motions will require a vote in order for them to pass. Yeah, just like we discussed before, since it's motion, you require procedural voting. Make sure you remember that. This happens too many times in MUN conferences that because the delegate feel like they're present, they can abstain during motions. No, they cannot abstain. You have to vote either yes or no, because this counts as procedural voting. In motions, make sure it's any motion that you propose, especially moderated caucus, it has to be in line with the realm of the topic. You cannot discuss anything outside of the topic. Yes, and then it will require a vote in order for it to pass. And remember, since procedural voting, that means you're applying simple majority. So let's say there are 30 delegates, you need 16 votes for your motion to pass. Yeah. If you're not sure what is the simple majority of the quorum or the quorum vote, usually the chairs will announce it during roll call. That being said, if you forget at any points of the conference, you can just raise points of parliamentary inquiry and ask the chairs what is the quorum vote or what is the simple majority. This is the type of motions. The first one is moderated caucus. As you can see, moderated caucus is moderated by the chair with limited speakers time. Members are given the floor after being recognized. So yeah, even if it is still considered an informal debate, in moderated caucus, the chair still moderate the council, and you can only speak when it's your turn and when you are being recognized by the chair. In order for a moderated caucus to be discussed, of course, someone need to raise a moderated caucus first, and the formula for moderated caucus consists of the nature of motion, and then the total time, individual speaking time, and topic. So for example, it goes like, thank you, Chair. Delegate of Indonesia would like to propose moderated caucus for 20 minutes, 2-minute speaking time on the topic of, and then you specify your topic. So that's the formula on how to propose moderated caucus. And then next you have unmoderated caucus. This is a form of informal debate that allows the people present in the committee, both the member delegates and also observers. I don't know if there will be observers in this conference or not, but if there is, yes, they can also participate in the moderated caucus. Essentially, you can move freely and speak directly with one another. So yeah, this is the most informal version of debate in MUN. In unmoderated caucus, you can actually, in physical MUN, you can even stand up, grab a coffee or a tea, and then discuss the topic together, and whatever you like. Okay, to be fair, some chairs does not allow the delegate to get out of the chamber, but in my experience, you can also get out of the chamber if you want, to discuss a matter outside of the councils as well. But in online MUN, yeah, unmoderated caucus, usually you just discuss it in the main room, but you can also ask the chairs for breakout room, so you have a more personalized space where only you and your block members can listen to the discussions. That's also possible. Next is consultations of the hall. This is something that I'm not included in the previous flow of the debate, as simple as because I don't think I can fit them in the picture. But yeah, essentially it is part of the informal debate and motions as well. A form of consultations of the whole is a form of informal debate moderated by the delegates. So the delegate might speak and continuously passes to another delegate that they choose until the total speaking time has elapsed. So, for example, for unmoderated caucus and consultations of the whole, you don't need to specify topic and you don't need to specify individual speaking time. So simply propose the nature of the motion and then propose the total time. So for example, Delegate of Indonesia would like to propose unmoderated caucus for 15 minutes, or Delegate of Indonesia would like to propose consultations of the whole for 15 minutes. Right. So a little bit more regarding consultations of the whole. The delegate that proposed the motion, if the motion were to pass, then they will start speaking first. Okay. So let's say I'm delegate of USA. I'm delegate of USA, and I propose consultations of the whole for 15 minutes. And apparently it passes, then the chairs will give the time to me to start speaking. In consultations of the whole, there's not exactly an individual speaking time. So yes, you can speak however long you want. So if the total time is 15 minutes, technically you can speak for the whole 15 minutes. Well, it's not very ideal, but yes, it's possible for you to do that. But technically you want to do it, you want to deliver a speech for like 3 or 4 minutes, depends on your content. And then you want to choose the next delegate who speaks. Usually the chairs will ask whether or not you want to speak. Not technically, that depends on the situation. Again, depends on the rules of procedure as well. Let's say delegate of USA, select delegate of Singapore, the delegate of Singapore speaks for, let's say, another 2 minutes. That means, for example, 10 minutes left, then delegate of Singapore can yield their time to like the next delegate as well. So the person who's currently speaking can choose the next speaker who speaks. In order to increase your chances to be chosen to speak in this situation, you can also raise your hand via Zoom so that the delegate that currently speaking knows you want the spot to speak in consultations of the whole. So you can always do that as well. This is important to remember. I mentioned in general speakers list, you must yield your time, correct? But that's not the case in motion. So even if the motion is 2 minutes, you only spoke for 30 seconds. So essentially you have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. You don't need to yield your time. It directly elapses for motion. So yielding is specific only towards general speakers list. Motion, whether or not you have time remaining, when your turn is elapsed, when you stop speaking, then your turn is elapses and goes to the next speaker after that. Okay, next, I want to talk about working paper. Working paper is a less formal and more flexible versions of draft resolution. So this document contains the collections of ideas and solutions from block members. Again, you probably know what block is already from the definitions at the beginning and terms. Essentially, a working paper is a document created by the block, and it contains the collections of solutions from every block members. Well, ideally, you want every block members to contribute, but especially in a beginner level MUN, maybe not everyone able to add a solution. So sometimes only several people that have clauses, even though they are in the same block with more people. That does happen from time to time, but that's okay. In working paper, as you can see in the note right there, different from draft resolution, a working paper has no format. So yeah, well, the draft resolution have this very specific format of heading, preambulatory clauses, and operative clauses, but that's not the case with working paper. You can even create a PowerPoint presentations, or you can even make a PDF out of Canva presentations and add pictures, maps, statistics. You can do all of that. It's possible to do that in working paper, and actually even better if you do all of that. That sort of like make it more unique. Because if you see my next point, it is not uncommon to see delegate format their working paper in draft resolution format to save time. So yeah, and I'll say 70% of the time, people simply make their working paper in DR format because they do not want to redo everything when it's time to submit draft resolution. So that's also possible for you to directly make them in DR format as well. But essentially, it has no format. So whether or not you want to add format or not, that depends on you. Next is working paper. Next is again the next advice. Working paper does not need signatories or sponsors for it to be submitted. So hence, in theory, you could submit your own working paper without including other people's ideas and solution. So yeah, that's possible. Let's say you already joined a block, but apparently you feel that in the middle of the session that your views are too different and it's simply not possible to align them anymore. In that situation, maybe you think it's already too late to join another blocks as well. If you want to submit your own working paper, that's fine, that's possible. But I want you to remember that even the working paper does not need signatories or sponsors, but draft resolution will need signatories or sponsors. So you might be able to submit a working paper by yourself, but you cannot do that if you want to submit a draft resolution. Well, technically you can if you are able to convince people to at least be your signatories, which I'm going to get to right after this one. Okay, draft resolution. So draft resolution is an official document containing the draft of a resolution which still being debated on the committee's floor. Each draft resolution is referred by a number assigned by the chairs. Once voted upon at the end of the debate, a draft resolution might become a resolution. So yes, you can have multiple draft resolution in the council. For example, there are 3 blocks, so at the end of the day, there are like 3 draft resolution. But again, this depends on the rules of procedure as well. As you can see, the fact that I constantly go back and forth with the terms of different rules of procedure, because in MUN, indeed, there are so many rules of procedure. Kind of like the debate where you have British Parliamentary, you have Asian, you have Australs. That's also the case in MUN. You have UN for MUN, you have Harvard World Procedure, you have Harvard Nationals Procedure, you have UN US. So you also have Timon as well. So again, like so many rules of procedure. But essentially, there are procedures that allows you to pass more than one draft resolution. So for example, the R1.1 already passed, then you will keep voting for the R1.2. If it passes, then it passes. But in several procedure, it only applies for one single draft resolution. So there's only can be one draft resolution that can be passes. So if the R1.1 is being voted and it passes, even though there are 2 other draft resolutions right behind the R1.1, the draft resolution will not even be voted upon because the R1.1 already passes. So again, this depends on the procedure. I would just advise you to ask your chairs tomorrow what procedure are you using. And then, as you can see in the note here, the R must contain heading, preambulatory clauses, and operative clauses. Heading consists of the committee name, the sponsor, the signatories, and the topic. So here, what I want to emphasize is the difference between sponsor and signatories. Maybe some of you are not familiar with the term. Sponsors refer to the main contributor of the draft resolution. So essentially, if you are able to be a sponsor, you get a lot of extra points for that because you are definitely one of the leader of the block. Signatories only means that you are in favor for that draft resolution to be discussed. So this is the most common misconception I've seen in MUN circuit. People think just because they are part of the signatory, that means they're the supporter of the draft resolution, but that's not the case. Signatory only means that you are in favor for those draft resolutions to be discussed. I hope that makes sense. So in theory, you can be signatories for multiple draft resolution. So imagine there are 3. Yes, you can easily be signatories for DR 1.1, DR 1.2, and DR 1.3 because you feel all 3 DR should be discussed. So that's also possible. But it becomes a problem when, since MUN is a competition, you kind of like do not necessarily want to give other people opportunity to raise a draft resolutions if they're struggling with signatories. For example, the minimum signatories is, again, depends on the situations, but also the chair's discussions as well. But let's say this block unable to meet the minimum number of signatories. In that situation, their draft resolution cannot be submitted, or they can at least submit it, but the chairs will not recognize it. Again, so you need to satisfy the minimum number of signatories. So yeah, again, negotiation is very important. Even if you are all by yourself, if you're able to convince people to at least give opportunity for you to talk about your draft resolution, then yeah, your draft resolution can easily be submitted and you get a lot of points for that. Next is preambulatory clauses, an introductory part of the resolution's content indicating the reason behind the decisions and general framework. So just the idea regarding the topic in general. Why should we discuss this topic? What is the urgencies of this topic? What are the challenges that we need to overcome? What are the past actions that have been made in the past? So as you can see, more like recognition, more than anything. So just recognition regarding the topic in general. But the big guns actually is operative clauses. So this is the solution, the collections of solution. As you can see, this is the primary part of the resolution text indicating the actions taken or recommended by the committee. So your collections of solutions is made under operative clauses. So essentially, this is the core aspects of draft resolutions. This is the things that you want to do in regards to this topic, which is essentially a solution. Okay, next is amendment. Amendment is a formal text which is presented as alteration to a draft resolution. I think that's a very basic definition. Let's imagine if DR 1.1 already been recognized, but you notice that you want to make revisions on draft 1.1, on draft resolution 1.1, you can send amendment. Although I want you to pay close attention because not everyone can raise amendment. If you are the sponsors of DR 1.1, you cannot amend your own draft resolutions. Instead, if you have amendment and you cannot amend that, so you kind of like have to work through the system and you ask someone that you trust to send the amendment so that you can have that discussion and you can revise your draft resolutions by doing that. Yeah, so but even if you're not part of the draft resolution and want to alter the draft resolution, you can still do that by sending amendment. There are 2 types of amendment. First is friendly amendment and then unfriendly amendment. Friendly amendment is any amendment that has the support of all draft resolution sponsors. So imagine if the sponsors of the DR 1.1 is Finland, Sweden, and Russia. Those are, with collections of countries there. But yeah, you need the permission of all 3 sponsors. If all 3 accept your amendment, in that situation, your amendment is recognized as friendly amendment. And as you can see right there, friendly amendment becomes part of a draft resolution automatically upon its introduction without a debate or a vote. So you don't need to do anything. If it's classified as friendly amendment, it will directly amend the draft resolutions without voting. Next is unfriendly amendment. So any amendment that at least one of the draft resolution sponsors disagree with its content. So again, in the example of Finland, Sweden, and Russia, even if Finland and Sweden agrees with your amendment, but Russia disagrees, that means it's still considered as unfriendly amendment. If it is unfriendly amendment, it may become part of the draft resolution only after a vote. Adopting unfriendly amendment may lead to sponsors abandoning the draft resolution. So remember, amendment affect the output of the meeting, that is the draft resolution itself, which means it will require a substantive vote, right? Which is a quorum vote. So you need to meet the minimum quorum vote in order for your amendment, in order for your unfriendly amendment to be adopted as and alter the draft resolutions. This is not common, but it happens sometimes. If the amendment is very specific towards one sponsor, for example, you have the options to strike a clause through amendment, which means you basically delete a clause. So let's say delegate of Russia, which disagrees with this amendment, because the content of amendment delete like 3 of his clauses. In that situation, it's very likely for Russia to quit the bloc essentially and create their own like working paper, even if it still opens. If not, they simply become a neutral third party that will just like comment on the situation instead of being the part of the bloc that doesn't really have the solutions anymore. That doesn't happen that often, but it's possible for that to happen. Okay, so those are all information regarding the rules of procedure and based on the procedure that I've seen in Bsjmun document. If you have more procedure that you want to ask me questions on, feel free to ask me right after this. Next is man-centered rule of thumb. So it's impossible to give you every single advice that I receive as a delegate, as a chair, as a coach, as a secretariat in a 2-hour session. But that being said, these are like my probably most important advice for delegates in general. The first one is MAN is a role-playing competition. Hence, you will be judged on your ability to play a role of a diplomat in your council. Remember, the main responsibility of the diplomat is to represent and protect the national interests of your country. Right. So essentially what I'm saying to you is that the key to at least stand a chance to win awards in MUN is to follow your country's stand very, very well. You have to make sure you research your country's stand very, very well. No matter how good a speaker you are, no matter how good a negotiator you are, no matter how good a presenter, a drafter you are, it doesn't matter if the things that you're doing is clashing with your country's stance. That is not acceptable by any means. You will not receive any awards in that situation because you forget the number one thing of MUN. That is, it is a role-playing competition. It's not a competition to prove you are smarter than other people. It's not a competition of being able to speak better than other people. It's a role-playing competition. So how well do you play your role? That's the number one role in MUN. No matter how good you are, it doesn't matter if it does not follow your country's stance. So make sure to really, really research your country's stance very, very well. And then don't forget that you're also a diplomat, which means you have to act like one. Often I met a lot of delegates who are very stubborn in a lot of ways. Stubborn is fine, but sometimes in a not polite way, especially to other delegates. And I feel like those delegates are missing the points of MUN because you're not there to convince people that you are. You're not there to prove that you are right or other people are wrong, but you are there to play a role of a diplomat. So if you disagree with someone, well, deliver it in a way that diplomat will do. Either deliver it politely, in a way that your explanation is very academic in a lot of ways without offending the personalities of the delegate, or you can also try to find compromise, which got me to my the point number 3, which I'm going to elaborate later. Next is maybe you ask yourself like right after this presentation, it does seem like super complex competition because of so many terms. Like you have friendly amendment, unfriendly amendment, moderated caucus, unmoderated caucus, consultations of the whole, points of order, rights of reply, points of parliamentary inquiry. So just points of personal privilege. You have president, you have president voting, you have substantive vote, procedural voting, and so many other terms that I can just go on and on and on in regards to MUN. So it does seems very intimidating and very complex. But in its core, I'm sure like my students who are hearing this presentation have been very bored with this role because I repeat it all the time. It is a very simple competition with basic objective. Essentially, your goal is simple. You simply need to convince the council that a problem exists and offer them the best way to solve the problem. All the complexity is simply the rules of procedure, right? But the actual objective is simple. You have to convince someone what exactly is the problem and then later offer them the solution to solve that very problem, okay? If you're able to do that, most likely you're fine. Most likely you're qualified for awards already. But yeah, convincing is the hard part, right? Whether or not you can convince someone to discuss this problem, whether or not you can convince someone to accept your solution. But yeah, that's basically it. That's the objective of the conference, is to propose a problem, convince people that problem is important and worthy to be discussed, and then offer them a solutions to solve the very problem that you're bringing. Next is different from debate competition. You don't need to disagree with most things that other delegates said, even when they are in different block. Instead, you can also compromise or ignore several statements / ideas, especially if there is no benefit for you to engage. We have this term in MUN called values. Whether or not you have values on doing certain things. So Mjun is if we're talking about comparison, it's kind of like an open world game. So it's not very clear what exactly you should be doing at any moment. Right. So what that means basically is that imagine if you are in a council with 40, 50 delegates, or if you're going to like even a bigger conference like Harvard Nationals, that could be like hundreds of delegates. It's impossible for you to rebut everything. You simply do not have enough time. The maximum time for moderated caucus is 2 minutes. Even then, it's not very common for people to propose a motion for 2 minutes. Oftentimes, it's like 1 minute and 30 seconds for individual speaking time. So imagine you have to rebut like 8 points in 1 minute and 30 seconds. That's simply not possible. Even the rebutting 2 points in 1 minute and 30 seconds is super hard already. So you have to be very selective in what exactly are you trying to say, right? So what do I mean by ignore here? I do not want you to misunderstand, because I think it could be quite damaging. If you have 4 people that you want to rebut, right? After you are not, but you have to analyze first. I do not have time to rebut all 4. In that situation, what I will do is that I will analyze among these 4, who are the 2 biggest competitor for, let's say, best delegate award that I'm going for. I will prioritize my rebuttals for these 2 individuals. Correct? So I will not engage in 4 and make my rebuttals extremely short for each points. Instead, I will just simply select 2 and then focus my rebuttals on them. So that's what it means by ignore. I don't ask you to ignore like people points, but more like you have to be very selective in what to say and what to rebut, what to target, so on and so forth. Compromising is even in MUN competition, I'll have to say compromising is not very easy to do, because oftentimes people are very defensive about their solution. Then they feel like if they compromise, let's say they sort of like combine your solution and their solution will just simply be your solution. So people does get very defensive in MUN. But it is possible to compromise, especially when you are an experienced delegate and they're also an experienced delegate. You can definitely find a way to make both solution become yours, instead of like integrating another solution to an existing solution. So yeah, try to find compromise as well. You don't always have to disagree with people. Next, in model UN, number speaks. It basically means it is essential and extremely advantageous to have a bigger block, because you can control the debate by choosing which motion to pass. You can ask your block members to equal your solution, and you will get extra points if your DR passes. Not to say that you cannot win best delegate if you are in smaller block, but the road to winning is much easier if you can lead a bigger block. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that it's good to be smart. It's good that your speech is good and everything. Yeah, you get a lot of points for that, but you cannot not negotiate. Like this is something that I've seen a lot from, especially from younger delegate. They feel like their speech will carry their performance. But you cannot escape negotiation. Negotiation is very, very important, especially if you are planning to win a lot of like high-level conference, because most high-level conference are open conference. Essentially, what it means is that there will be varsity delegates as well, and there will be younger delegates as well. And varsity manners tend to be more enthusiastic in negotiation. So yes, you definitely need to learn how to negotiate. The rule of thumb is that you want to get as many people as your block as soon as possible, because oftentimes, because I feel like grabbing scattered delegates is much easier rather than convincing someone to leave their own block. So that's something that you have to bear in mind as well. But yeah, just like what I mentioned here, because if you have more people in your block, let's say you have 50% plus 1. For example, if the total delegate are like 30 delegates, you have 16, then you can easily tell your block members, guys, let's only vote for motions coming from people from our block. If it's people from other block, let's not vote for them. Like you can easily do that if you have bigger block numbers. And that is very, very important. Not only that you get points for your motion to be voted, right? But most importantly, you have control over what is being discussed next. So you can tailor the discussion based on the solutions that you have. And if you look at like the rule of thumb number 2, right? You simply need to convince people what is the problem and offer them a solution to solve it. So if you have control over motion, you can constantly choose which problem should we discuss next. So yeah, your life will be much easier if you are a part of a bigger block. Then you can ask your block members to equal your solution. sort of a given. And of course, if you will get extra point if your DR were to pass. Again, but the next sentence is also very critical, not to say that you cannot win best delegate if you are in smaller block. That happens very, very often, maybe not as often as people who win bigger block, but it does happen. So you are not out of the race completely if your block is smaller, but the road to winning is so much easier if you can get bigger block. So that's what it means by numbers mix. That doesn't necessarily discredit your ability to deliver a good speech, but it basically means as good as yours as a speaker you are, you cannot escape the importance of negotiation in it. All right, I'm pretty sure that's everything from this presentation. Again, you can download the link to his presentation if you want to have this link to his presentation. You can just go to our Instagram page, and then you open the bio in our Instagram, and then you have the access to our presentation. If you want to use this presentation in your MUN club or just like to introduce your friends to MUN in general, I don't mind. You can definitely use this presentation, and you have my permission to do so. Right, I think that's everything. I believe I need to give the floor back towards the moderator. Is Sai here?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you so much, Patrick, for coming down here and helping prep our delegates for Bsjmun 2022. This was very enlightening and informative presentation, and I think this is one of the best opportunities the delegates will receive throughout this whole conference and their MUN journeys to gain tips from one of Indonesia's most prominent MUNers. As one of Patrick's students myself, I'll assure you that these tips have gotten me to several difficult MUNs, and I have no doubt that they will be as helpful for you guys. We will now move on to the Q&A session. So delegates, this is an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions you'd like, which are appropriate to MUN, of course, for Patrick, and he'll be able to answer them. So are there any questions? You can just type them in the chat box or even raise your hand. And okay, we already have one. Thank you so much for being so enthusiastic. Graciela, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Sai. So, Mr. Patrick, I would like to ask, how will the chairs evaluate the performance of delegates? It is indeed mostly on participation, but are there like any scoring aspect, any other aspects that to contribute to us most likely to win? Like maybe a point system that will the chairs incorporate to basically like choose the best delegate?
All right. Thank you guys for your questions. Very, very good questions, by the way. And this is a very hot debate to be discussed in MUN circuit in general, because some circuits have a very clear point tallying system. But I'll say in Indonesia, we do not have like a very specific point tally system that we're using to grade delegates. That being said, I don't know whether or not Bsjmun have a point tally system that they're using in order to evaluate delegates per se. But I can pretty much explain it in like a couple of things when it comes to analysis for words. It depends on three things. First, it depends on your ability your substantive ability. It basically means your ability to deliver a good speeches, to propose motions, so on and so forth. And then you will be also judged by your diplomacy skills, which based on your ability to lead the bloc, what else? To lead the bloc, maybe to convince someone to pass your amendments, convince someone to pass your, let's say, solution. And then after substance and after negotiation, you will also be judged by your drafting skills. That is, if you are able to create a more detailed solution in comparison to the other block, for example, you get extra points for that as well. And in the end of the day, if your draft solution passes and you are the leader of the bigger block, most likely you will get best delegate. So those three things: substance, which consists of speeches, motions, and then negotiations, and then drafting. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Patrick.
Thank you so much, Graciela. We'll move on to Retno.
Okay, so thank you. My question for Mr. Patrick is, what are your tips for sponsors? How can you present properly and on time with the time limit, and how to properly answer questions given?
Okay, thank you for your question, Retno. First of all, I think I've seen some mistake during presentations, especially in intermediate or beginner level MUN, is that they read the entire draft resolution. I think that's a huge mistake because most likely you don't have time Sometimes the chair have like 5 minutes. They only give you 5 minutes for presentation. And in some rare occasion, that includes question and answer sessions as well. So if you simply read the whole presentation, not only that it's unnecessary because people can read the draft resolution themselves, you also takes a lot of time for possible Q&A session, which give you a lot of points as sponsors. So this is how I'm going to do it. First, most likely, I'm going to only briefly talk about preambulatory clauses, if I'm going to talk about it at all. If I know I have like a 9 pages draft resolution and only have 4 or 5 minutes, I'm just going to ignore the entire preambulatory clauses and focus directly on the operative clauses. In the operative clauses, I will pay close attention towards solutions that have been heavily discussed in the council. So let's say you have 20 solutions. Now that's a lot, but yeah, just imagine you have 20 solutions. In that situation, I can guarantee you not all 20 solutions are equal with each other. In a sense that maybe like only 5 solutions or 6 or 7 solutions that were actually being discussed in the council. The rest were only like mentioned very, very briefly during moderated caucus. So they're kind of like not there essentially. But I will pay close attention to a solution that have been in the bigger proximity of debate in a way. So in that situations, I will invest more time to elaborate on those points, while the other points I'll just like briefly explain that. Or also an individual advice is that if you are the sponsors of the draft resolution, most likely you have your solutions within that draft resolution. I will also pay close attention to my own solution and probably like explain it more a little bit. So I'm giving you advice in a way that you can maximize your points from presentation. So focus on points that are heavily discussed, so solutions that are heavily discussed, and focus on your own points and invest more time to discuss those clauses.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And thank you, Retno, for the question. Moving on, Caitlin.
Sorry, but just asking. So if a person insults you or your country, how do you kind of retaliate with a right to reply while being diplomatic?
Okay. Thank you for your question, Kathleen. Very good questions. Yes, you always have to stay diplomatic. My number one advice is that never offend them right back. Like your rights of reply cannot contain what's wrong with their personality. Saying, "Oh, you're even much worse person. You're a much worse person than I am." Like that's not how you use rights of reply. Instead, you can simply point out what are they doing. This is the thing. Even if you do not like offend them personally and you don't get the satisfaction to, essentially get revenge in a way, but the fact that you're able to point that out, the chairs will make sure to like give consequences to the person who said something offensive against you. So simply points that out. The points of rights of reply is not necessarily to defend yourself in any way, but more towards exposing the person who are using those things that maybe some delegates or even some chairs are not noticing. So simply points that out, you get points for noticing, and they get like consequences. Maybe they were given a warning or what for their behavior. So I think that would be the best way to do it.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you so much, Patrick. That was a very, very useful question, because often delegates do tend to underestimate or sometimes not be diplomatic when they're trying to retaliate. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Moving on, Fayola.
So is it okay to establish a less diplomatic solution if it's a rare situation where diplomatic solutions are not effective? Like, for example, if the topic is about terrorism or war, and my solution would be to send military forces to resume violence against the terrorists. So will that be okay?
All right. Remember, thank you, Viola, for your question. Remember the first rule of thumb that I talked to you guys previously. The number one objective is to role play as the diplomat of your country, which means whatever your country stands for, no matter how horrible the solution is, it's something that you have to propose in a council. For example, let's say in the situations of Russia and Ukraine, right? If you're a delegate of Russia, you have to support invasion, no matter how unjustified that movement is. But that's just the way it goes. You are a diplomat. So whatever your country are doing, that will be your stance. But also you mentioned regarding invasion to stop terrorism and so on and so forth. I will add an extra advice in the sense that you need to also consider your council's mandate So for example, you're discussing this topic, let's say dissect, you're probably not able to send any invitation in a way because that's simply not possible for dissect. Even for UNSC, it's not possible because what UNSC can do is to send peacekeepers, and peacekeepers is not for war, it's for protecting the integrity of a certain territory. So you have to pay attention to these two things. First is your council mandate, and then your country's interest. If doing a, let's say, morally ambiguous thing is exactly what your country is doing, then you have to find a way to support that, no matter how awful that sounds. But yeah, so it's fine to do that as long as it's within the council's mandate and your country's stance as well.
Thank you so much. Moving onwards, Jonathan.
Oh, yeah, thank you for the time. Regarding the first general rule of thumb, if I was to hypothetically represent a country which in real life automatically acts aggressively towards a certain country, also incorporate that behavior towards that country's delegate in the committee sessions, or would that be generally frowned upon?
Jonathan, I'm really, really sorry, but I think your mic is a bit shaky. We're not able to clearly hear you. Could you try to repeat that? Or if it's still not possible, you could type in the chat.
Oh,
And
I would just type it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll address your
that's
question later.
fine. All right, so while Jonathan's typing, we'll move on to Phoebe.
Thank you for using. Thank you for the floor. Hi, Mr. Patrick. When can point of information be used, and are there any tips on being the main submitter of a resolution?
All right. Thank you, Phoebe, for your questions. I guess in MUN, points of information really yielding for question and answers during your GSL. So if you want to ask me when should I use points of information, when you know you have extra time in your GSL, that's the number one thing. I know a lot of people who use points of information that is yield to question and answers during GSL, but they only have like 10 seconds, 12 seconds. Most likely you will not be able to give a comprehensive answers. So in a lot of ways, you're putting yourself at a lot of disadvantage because people will be asking good questions. If people were to ask good questions and you only have 12 seconds to justify, then you probably will not be able to answer that question. So you will be seen unable to answer the questions. So you have to really be mindful regarding the time limit in your general speakers list. But when should you open yourself for points of information? My advice is when you notice that there's something that need to be asked regarding your GSL. For example, in the first GSL, I will not open myself for question and answer or points of information because I know for sure regarding the content that I want to talk about. Most likely it will be about my solution, it will be about my country stances, it will be about introducing the topic, so on and so forth. And just elaborating on those points only, it will probably already exceed like 1 minute and 30 seconds. So maybe around like 1 minute 45, 40. So I will focus myself to really like take advantage of the whole length of the general speakers list. But let's say this is the second general speakers list, right? And then again, with general speakers list, you can talk pretty much about anything. So in this situation, you can easily like even encourage people to ask points of information before you yield your time. So your speech could contain information such as delegate of, let's say delegate of like Australia in this case. Delegate of Australia believe that the situations that we're currently in let's say the, I don't know, Russia-Ukraine conflict is a very tedious situation because of this reason, ABC. And then you can say, that being said, we have several problems that we think are the root causes of this topic, and those problems are ABC as well. Next, we're going to open ourselves for question and answers, and we highly encourage the delegates in this council to ask questions regarding the specific problems that you were mentioning before. That being said, if you are doing that, then you are forcing other people to ask questions related to what you want to talk about. So this is how you sort of like force the debate to go your ways in a way that you are forcing people to ask questions on the topic that you're already familiar with. So like the next motion, it's very likely that people will raise emotions regarding the thing that we just mentioned in your GSL. So make sure to tailor the situations for question and answers. Don't just like deliver a speech and hopefully feel that, okay, hopefully someone give me a good question and I can answer with good answers as well. Not very efficient. So better tailor the situation in your benefit, and only then you can open yourself for question and answer. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phoebe, for that great question. It's always a challenge to understand what a speech should be addressed towards. So that's very helpful. Before we move on to a further question, I'll just read out Jonathan's question, Patrick, for you, and then you can hopefully answer it. Jonathan's question is, if I was to hypothetically represent a country which in real life diplomatically acts aggressively towards a certain country, should I also incorporate that behavior towards the country's delegate in the committee session, or would that be generally frowned upon?
Oh, very specific question. I think that's probably something that you will be representing in this conference, probably, Jonathan. That being said, very, very good questions, very realistic in a lot of ways. The answer is very short. Yes. If let's say you're representing USA and then the topic is Russia and Ukraine, you have to be aggressive to Russia in that situation. You have to condemn a lot of things, just exactly what the US diplomat will be doing in actual MUN conferences. But the question is, to what extent can you be aggressive? Again, the rules of rights of reply, you cannot personally insult the country's integrity, and you cannot personally insult the delegate themselves. So be aggressive in an academic way. So if you condemn the actions of the country, don't condemn like the culture or the religion or what, or of course do not condemn like the personality of the person who represent that countries as well. So be aggressive in an academic terms.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you so much, Jonathan. That's one of the key questions that MUNers often have, and it's really important about finding that fine line between rebutting and debating within an academic environment and also taking that into personal culture. So that's a really important line that all delegates should be able to find. Moving on, Graciela has a second question. Go ahead.
Yes, I would like to clarify on the general speaker list. Does everyone like make a speech or their speech, or is it like a volunteering procedure? How does the chair determine who is selected to speak? And are we like allowed to volunteer first?
For general speakers list, the chairs will just open the speakers list and ask questions like, for countries who wish to be listed in the general speakers list, in this case, raise your hand. In physical MUN, raise your placard. And then the chairs will simply select people randomly based on who are raising their hands and who are raising their placard.
And second question on that.
Sure.
Let's say that very many people are actually wanting to actually open up with their speech. How does the chair determine like who to select? The first come, first serve?
That's up to the chair preference. First come, first serve is very tricky because in a lot of ways, I feel that in a lot of situations, maybe some delegates here can also like confirm the story. The delegates sort of like raise their hands before the chair asking questions and telling them to raise their hands. So they sort of like stealing the start so that they can always get accepted. So when I was chairing, I never select like based on first come, first serve. If I want to choose the first person just because I want to choose it, not because they're first. So it's very random. If you are not selected in the general speakers list, you can always send private message to the chair. So you can be included, but again, that depends on the chairs. The number one rule is just to understand what exactly your chair opens to when it comes to the general speakers list. But yeah, just wait for your turn. Most chairs will try to make sure it's as equal as possible. When they're selecting like the next person who speaks, they look at like the speakers list, and then if they notice this person has speak, they will prioritize the person that have not speak.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And we'll move on to our next question. This is from Sasha.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. So, Mr. Patrick, I would like to ask, are you allowed to use like a related but out of topic weakness of another country to challenge their attempt to criticize your solution? So like, for example, in my case, I am the United States in the Afghan security crisis. And then I'm imagining a scenario where China will criticize my solution due to America's human rights records in Afghanistan. And I want to use China's human rights record towards the Uyghur to kind of challenge their attempt to criticize my solution. Is that allowed?
All right. Very, very good question. Yes, but you cannot build your case based on that. So there's a difference with using that as an example, as an illustration, and there is a difference with building your entire speech based on that facts alone. So for example, you cannot say you cannot like make sure like the next 3 or 4 speeches are exactly the history of China, let's say with Rohingya or what, as a form of like discriminations on human rights protections, so on and so forth. But instead you can do stuff like we're very confused why the delegate of China is lecturing the delegate of US on the principle of human rights, seeing there's so many human rights violations that currently happening in China, for example, with the Rohingya people, so on and so forth. So like just use that as an example in that situation. It's okay, but I highly would not encourage you to use that entire example as like the whole building point of your speech. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Patrick and Sasha. I hope that answers your question. Next, we have Caitlin again. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for this opportunity again. So I have 2 questions. So first question is, what's the difference between working papers and draft resolutions? And my second question is, so what are some of your top tips regarding negotiation with delegates, like for them to support you if you want to include an amendment or a draft resolution, etc.?
Oh, all right. Okay, I think I'll need to open my presentation again for that question. I hope that's okay. Okay, so the difference between what was it? Working paper and draft resolution. Sorry. Just a sec. Right, cool. So as you can see here, working paper is a less formal and more flexible versions of the draft resolution. So the number one difference is that working paper has no format, draft resolutions has format. The similarities is that both working paper and draft resolution directly brings up the solution. But the difference is, well, working paper, you have no format on how to introduce your solution, but in draft resolutions, you have to follow a very specific format on how to introduce your solution. I will highly advise you to open a document sent to you by Bsjmun. I think it was about rules of procedure. In that document, they give you an examples of draft resolution, so you can see the difference of formatting between working paper and draft resolution by seeing the format of draft resolution, because working paper has no format. So that's the number one difference. And then what else? In working paper, here, look at note number 3. Working paper does not need signatories or sponsors. While in draft resolution, in order for it to be submitted, you need a minimum amount of signatories and you need a minimum amount of sponsors as well. If you want to ask me what is the minimum number of signatories and sponsors, that depends on the entire delegate present, but the rule of thumb is like 1/5 of total delegate present in the council for signatories, for minimum signatories. But even in that situations, again, it depends on the discretions of the chair. So you have to ask your chairs again tomorrow, which I'm sure even without you asking, they will mention it beforehand. So those are the difference between working paper and draft resolution. And then regarding your second questions, how do we convince other people to support our solution? This is kind of like a give and take in a way. Like, for example, you can easily say, delegate of this, I really support your solution, especially on the funding aspect. Would you mind looking at our solutions as well and see whether or not you agree with our solution? So by you saying in front that you agree with their solution, it heightens the chances that they will support your solution as well. So this is like a psychological, very specific niche advice on how to do that. But generally, I'll say just be a nice person. Oftentimes in MUN, there are a lot of people who are very aggressive, and those kind of people are very hard to support. Even if you know exactly what they're saying is right, but it's just psychologically hard to support them. So my advice is, regardless how experienced you are, be nice. You don't necessarily have to be like a kind person in like conference and try to help everyone. Simply, I don't think you have time to do that. But at the very least, listen to other people's point, give other people a chance to speak. Most likely in that situation, they will be more open to listening to your points and solutions as well. So give and take.
All right, thanks so much, Patrick. And thanks so much, Caitlin, for the question. I hope that answers it. Delegates, also a really important note is that you guys don't only have to raise your hands. You can also text me in the chat, private message, or put in the chat, and I'll read it out. Absolutely no obligation to speak of any sort. Okay, thank you so much, Phoebe. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Patrick. How to win best delegate?
Sorry, Phoebe, can you repeat that? I cannot hear you.
How can I win the best delegate award?
Oh, how can you win the best delegate award? Very hard question indeed, because it's such a open questions. First, hopefully people in your council are not very good. This is a realistic answer to that question, but yeah, no. All right. If you want to increase your chances to win an MUN, is this your first conference or have you ever joined any conference before this?
Yeah, it's my second one actually.
Your second conference. Okay. That means I'll say probably there are people who are more experienced than you, but you can always substitute experience with research. So in that situation, if someone is more experienced than you, then you have to research harder than them. The biggest problem is that even the most experienced are often the one who research most. So if you truly want to compete with those kind of people that are more experienced and probably have win awards in the past, then you have to research a lot of things. Not just a lot of things, but very specific as well. Know what you want to research. My advice is always starts with pyramid method research. It basically means you start with general issue, and then slowly as you go down, go up to the pyramid, it becomes much more niche. So you start with more general aspects first, and then you go towards a more country specific research. So if you're representing Australia in this case, then you have to research what Australia stands for, what Australia has done in the past. And then after that, you can also research past actions. So past action basically means what are the past actions that have been done in the past, both by the United Nations, Australia, other countries, other institutions. That's what I always do whenever I join MUN. Instead of creating a solution from scratch, instead I try to find existing solutions, and then I benchmark and sort of like revise the solution to make it like my own solution, and then rebrand it as in a way that it looks new and totally from me. The reason why I do that is because, well, when I was still joining MUN, I was like around 17, 18 years old. I don't think I'm smart enough than the people who actually come up with proposals on creating programs in the UN level. So if you have access to those information, which you definitely do because you have internet, in that situation, might as well we take information from their existing solution, we revised it, make it our own, and then rebrand it as a new solution, and then use that as your strategy. Now, again, just like what I mentioned in the rule of thumb here, I cannot access it. Here, okay, this is all right. So if you've seen this rule of thumb again, even for maybe some of you guys already get bored with this saying that MUN is a very simple competition. You simply need to convince people what is the problem and then offer them a solution to solve that problem. So if you focus your research based on those two things, of course you have to be in line with your country sense as well. But if you, other than that, if you focus your solution on like the problems, what are the urgencies of the problem, and try your best to convince other people that the solution, the problem that we're facing is actually very, very problematic and very urgent, and they buy that premise. Next, you simply tell them what is the solution to solve that problem. Then they accept that, you're technically already golden. So you simply need to do those things repeatedly for like 4 or 5 times if you have 4 or 5 solutions. So yeah, just those two things. Research as much as possible. That's the best advice I can give you, especially if you're less experienced than let's say some of the other target.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Phoebe. Thank you so much, Patrick. We've got another question in chat, which goes, could you please reiterate the formal way of being able to passively point out another country's insult in case they become violent against yours? So in other words, how to be diplomatically rebut.
Oh, sorry, can you repeat like the question? I sort of like you're cut off from
Sure. Yeah, no worries. I think I'm having a bit of internet issues as well. Could you please reiterate the formal way of being able to passively point out another country's insult in case they become violent against you?
Oh, I'm guessing this is in the case
so
of
in other words, diplomatic rebuttal.
Oh, diplomatic rebuttal.
No, it's more diplomatic rebuttal, yeah.
So more on the substance there rather than like the personal attack and stuff. Right?
Yeah.
My advice is, first, the question is a bit misleading. I don't think you need to be passive in rebutting. I don't think there's such thing as like passive rebuttals. The very act of rebuttals is confrontative, right? It's a very aggressive aspects of debating. Again, like my advice is that you can always be aggressive as long as you are academically aggressive, right? If someone, let's say, points out the something is wrong with your argument, for example, then yeah, if you disagree with their premise, then simply rebut, well, that's not true because of this reason, right? So you can directly be aggressive with your rebuttals. Again, the term aggressive here is being put in a vacuum of academic terms, as long as you refrain yourself from being from offending the personal life of like the person that rebuts you, for example, or what else, or the national identity of that person. In that situation, you can be as aggressive as you want to, as long as you academically aggressive. Sorry, I just keep coming back to that terms, which I might. So last, just like to reiterate on my answer, you can be aggressive. Don't be afraid that you will offend someone, as long as your content does not personally offend someone. So as long as you within the vacuum of the topic and within the vacuum of academic discussion, you can be as offensive as you want.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you so much, Doggett, for that insightful question. I mean, it's really important to find that fine line where you're still staying within academic debate, but you don't become personally offensive. Moving on, Sasha, once again, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for another opportunity to ask question. Mr. Patrick, my question this time is about block members. So, like, first of all, when is the best time to recruit delegates into your block? And number two, is it better to recruit delegates in a discreet manner, such as like texting them through WhatsApp, or is it better to like just open out recruit them through like unmoderated caucuses?
Oh, all right. Very specific question again. Thank you. All right. So recruitment. Maybe for some of the delegates that are a little bit new and confused with the term that was mentioned by Sasha, what it means by discrete essentially is that you don't necessarily lobby everyone during unmoderated caucus. Instead, you probably only lobby some in unmoderated caucus while sending like private message to like some other delegates as a form of invitation to your blog. In my opinion, ideally, you do not want to be discreet. You want to be as loud as possible that you're recruiting people, and if they get in, then the chairs can see you're actually recruit people, right? If you message people, and at the end of the day, let's say there are two leaders in that block, the chair are not very sure there is like who exactly are like negotiating for this delegate to join this block. It could be credited to like your other block leader, for example. You definitely do not want to do that. But I do understand that sometimes simply not possible. For example, right, you do not want to hog all the time during the MC. So you kind of like need to give other people time to speak as well. So in that situation where you cannot like necessarily speak, you kind of like have to message people. But if you ask my opinion, ideally what you should do, you should be as loud as possible when it comes to negotiating people. Loud in the sense that as open as possible so that the chairs can see and the delegates can see. And that's the best way for you to guarantee the points goes to you instead of your other block leaders.
Thank you so much, Sasha, and thank you so much, Patrick. Delegates, I will not lie to you, that was one of the most insightful questions we've had so far, especially because I think Patrick can vouch for this. Lobbying has never been my favorite component of MUN, but it is always a social game, and for that main reason, I think it's a really important tip that you delegates should acknowledge is the fact that it is a very social game, and because of that, lobbying is very, very important, especially when recruiting.
You guys here
I'm moving
my
on,
previous
Graciela.
presentation, where I mentioned there are some delegates who think their speech and substance could carry their entire conference performance. I was actually talking about Sai. At the beginning, he was like, no, I don't want to negotiate. I'll just make a good speeches and just prepare as much research as possible. But in the end of the day, you have to negotiate, right, Sai?
Exactly. It's all MUN's about. It is a social game, and because of that, at the end, what it's all about is just collaborating with our delegates and trying to prove your own point and convince them on that. Graciela, you have the floor.
Yeah, so for my third question, can the right of reply be used directly after you feel offended by like directly replying and just cutting off the speech? Or does it always need to be after with a discreet private chat to the chairs?
After. the private chat to the chair. The reason why a lot of people cannot necessarily judge rights of reply, they feel like they're being offended, but based on the views of the chairs believe and feel that they're not essentially offending your personality instead of your points. So there could be a lot of times where people misunderstood rights of reply is worthy or not. I cannot say that this happens a lot, because I do have to admit even then chairs does make error from time to times, where essentially they should be giving rights of reply to the delegate, but because they simply wasn't paying attention to the previous statement, they sort of like no, this does not worthy rights of reply. But to avoid situation where a lot of people like cut each other because they simply feel offended, yes, it have to be through the chairs first, and only when the chairs guaranteed your rights of reply is when you can deliver your speech. Otherwise, you cannot deliver your rights of reply.
Thank you so much, Graciela. Thank you so much, Patrick. Furthermore, Caitlin, you have the floor.
Thank you. And sorry, once again, I have two other questions.
It's fine.
Sorry, but just asking, not that I'm accusing anyone or anything, but it's because this happened in my previous conference. So if, for example, the chairs were kind of biased towards a certain delegate and it was incredibly noticeable, is there anything you can do to bring that to attention? And my second question would be, for example, if you had a very large block, could there be like more than one leader of it? Like, for example, 2 or 3 people who kind of regulated everything? Would that, could that also happen?
Yeah, right. Just before that, Kathleen, I wanted to ask you a question. When did you know that this chair is biased? Was that after awarding ceremony, or was that like during the whole sessions of the conference?
It was like, so it was way before the awarding ceremony. It was like, it was, so at first it was kind of getting noticeable, but then nobody really said anything. So then until it was the second day, and then everyone was, because we were all in communication, and then everyone already knew that that delegate was going to get best delegate, and it turned out that she really did get best delegate.
Okay. All right. Well, the first thing that I have to say is that it's very unfortunate that not all people who chair in MUN are qualified. There are people that definitely, in my opinion, are not ready to chair, but yeah, they just chair anyway, because sometimes they're like the friends of the secretariat or what. But I don't think that's going to happen in Bsjmun. I saw the chairing lineup already. It's pretty crazy. So I guess I think you guys are safe here. But in that situation, what you should do is that you have to rally with other delegates in your council and really have a discussion regarding the bias chair. And if you guys truly believe that the chairs, I don't know, yes or are, I don't know how many of them are biased, but yeah, report to the secretariat. But my advice is you have to find other people who agrees with you. So not just like you reporting single-handedly, because yeah, that could be your personal, the secretariat can feel like maybe that's just what you feel, not necessarily what happens in the council. But if you can collect like 7, 8, 10 people who feel the same way as you do, you can report that matter to the secretariat. This is not common in Asian MUN, but there is such thing called motions of non-confidence. Essentially, it's a motion to kick the chairs, but that doesn't exist in Asian circuit. But yeah, that exists in European, if you guys ever wanted to join like European circuit. But in a situation where a motion of non-confidence does not exist, then simply report to the secretariat. To your second question, is it possible to have multiple readers in a block? Yes, because oftentimes you even have more than one sponsor for each draft resolution. So those people could be seen as like the leader of the block. So that's definitely possible.
I think I would like to answer that question.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Secretary.
Hey guys, Secretary General here. So first of all, if that does happen to you, I really want to apologize in our, if that does happen to you in our conference. If that does happen, please let me know directly. I'll be there to entertain any of your concerns, definitely, because that's my fault for picking a chair that may be too biased. But over the course of the past few months, we have had some rigorous interviews with all our chair applicants, and we have made sure that if they whether they will be biased and what will happen if a certain delegate does report them anyway. So we have all the chairs trained to know how not to be biased and how to deal with it if they do feel some sort of inclination to be biased. I also want to let you know that it could happen that there's some like human biasness. Maybe if you're a female chair, then you would certainly maybe select a delegate that may be female as well. Just those human personal biasness, but we have also trained our chairs not to do that. One last thing I did want to mention is, yes, once again, do let me know if there's any instances of this happening. Do reach out to me or Sai, your Secretary Generals for this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chiara. Once again, Caitlin, just like Chiara said, if there was any concern, you can always tell us. We're here just to help you guys and hope you guys have the best conference possible. Moving on, Fayola.
So would a chair prefer a delegate that speaks with passion and intensity, as in like a little bit aggressive, or a delegate that speaks calmly and slowly?
That's what Chiara mentioned before. It's personal biasness. So every chair have like their own preference on what can be considered as like a good speaker per se. Oftentimes it's very similar to their own way of speaking because they think that's the best way to speak. If the chairs tend to be very passionate, they might be a little bit more into passionate delegate. If the chairs tend to be very calm and probably that's their preference on the speakers as well. But in my opinion, I don't think that doesn't necessarily like impact your score that much, because in the end of the day, it's content. I do think passion does matters, but even then, there should be a place and time for that, because several topics doesn't require you to talk about passion. For example, if you're talking about lack of funding and you're explaining the mechanism where you get the money from, I don't think you need to be like angry about that. So really depends on the topics and the motion that are being discussed. But there are a couple of things that you can do. One, try to spot as early as possible based on your chair's behavior, the way they speak. Are they like a very passionate speaker, or are they a very calm speaker? Then try to mirror that as much as you can. But even then, it doesn't have to. My advice is just be yourself, because the point of being passionate or calm doesn't necessarily is a big point in substance. As long as you are able to deliver your speech clearly, I don't think it changes a lot of things. But if you want to make like that small adjustment, yeah, you can try to spot the behavior of your chair and try to mirror that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Patrick, as well. Delegates, apologies due to the time restrictions. We'll be entertaining only one more final question. That was a direct message to the Deputy Secretary General, and this was quite a generic question. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so before that, I do want to announce that we have a Google form for feedback, and we'd really appreciate if you guys could fill it out. It'll take 2 seconds tops, and I'll just include the link right now. This is for feedback for Bsjmun as well for MUN Center. So, thank you.
Okay, definitely, delegates. Please do fill that out. That'll be very, very important. Okay, so the final question, Patrick, for you was a very generic one. It was that Mmun itself is a very intense game, and while we're all talking diplomacy and delegates trying to be the best, try to be the nicest they can in conveying their points, often there are times where you can slip up, and in that case, you tend to get demotivated a lot. What would be your best advice for them to like keep on going, and even if they do slip up or fall down, to keep?
Can you answer that question first? I think you're much more experienced in that area.
All right, delegates. Definitely. So, just if you guys didn't know, when I was in NTU MUN, I had a similar experience where I actually slipped up incredibly on the first day, but had to come back on second day. And it's just about, delegates, the fact that it's never too late for you to impress the chairs on your performance. Because the thing with chairs and in Mmun conference is that it's not essentially that they create some sort of precedent with delegates after the first year or so. They're always continuously monitoring your performance on a daily basis, no, even more ComSES basis, and every motion you propose. So it's always important that, delegates, you continuously keep on performing and never let some slip up try and demotivate you from pushing forward. I think that would be the best advice to give you. And I think Patrick agrees with that as well.
All right. Thank you, Sai, for your answer. I think my answer is quite similar to that. I'll probably add a couple new things. When you're tired, you need to know that other people are tired as well. So it's not just you. So other people also, like some people, not other people, but I'll say like a lot of delegates after the first day will definitely not be as good as they were on the first day, because they have like all of their research on the first day and they're using all of their materials on the second. Well, on the second day, people are sort of like missing a lot. Some of them are already like very, very tired, especially when they know they have no chance to win awards in that situation. They are very, very quiet the second day in comparison to they were on the first day. So just you need to understand that not only you that are tired, but other people are tired as well. But what makes someone worthy of a best delegate is because they are different from the rest of the delegate. So if you're tired, then simply push yourself. I know it's easier said than done, but stamina plays a lot of role in MUN, because we also consider consistency. So force yourself as much as you can. It's kind of like a marathon. I know you should not force yourself during marathon, but in order for you to get like farther than you were before, you kind of like have to force yourself. So if you force yourself to this extent on this particular conference, then the next conference that you're joining, you can even push yourself even harder and even further away than you were right now. So mentally push yourself. And even if you're tired, just say everyone is tired, but what makes me a best delegate is because I can push myself out of this tiredness. Right, I think that's all, Sai.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick. Delegates, I think with that concludes our pre-event session and Q&A. Chiara, do you have anything else to add?
Yes, sorry about that with the Google form, everyone. The working link should be in the Zoom chat right now, and it will also be emailed to you guys. I want to thank Patrick. I want to thank Munn Center. I want to thank Ms. Regina, Ms. Wong. I want to thank the team who have been working behind the scenes, Tiara, Sai, Dan, and Philip, of course. And all of this will be streamed on and posted on YouTube. So if you guys kind of dropped out due to Wi-Fi issues, you can always watch it on YouTube. And good luck to you all, guys. Good luck to all of you guys for tomorrow.